Right, just before we crack on with this episode, just a quick word about our sponsor, KS Civils and Groundworks Limited, based in Leeds. They have over 296 years of combined experience in civil engineering and groundworks. Led by Director Carl Smith, their team is known for honesty, reliability and commitment to the highest safety and quality standards. They're proudly ISO accredited and fully CHAS Elite accredited. No matter the size of your project, KS Civils and Groundworks delivers professional, trustworthy service you can rely on. To learn more, visit kscivilsandgroundworks.co.uk. Now let's dive back into this episode.
Hi, welcome back to the podcast. Tonight I've got Ed Mackenzie on with me from the Elysium Memorial Foundation. And we'll talk more about that later on. Quite an important thing that I think people should understand. And I really hope it gets the backing it needs and gets completed. Now, Ed served with the Highlanders for many years and now is doing like close protection and stuff like that. But again, we'll get onto that again later. Hi, Ed, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks very much for having me on.
No, like I said to everyone who comes on, if they didn't, I wouldn't have anyone to talk to or anything to do. So, thanks as all to you. We went over the questions quickly before we started recording, but just to go over them again, it's, where did you grow up? Why did you join the military? What was it like? Why did you leave? And what have you done since? So if you just want to start off by giving us a bit of background about where you grew up and your decision to join the military.
So I grew up between England and Scotland. I was at boarding school. My parents are from Scotland, as am I. So it was a family regiment. I decided at, I suppose, 16, 17, I was going to, follow in the footsteps of pretty much everyone else in my family. My father didn't serve, but his father did. And he was in Seaforth Highlanders. So, I thought it was just a natural thing. Eldest boy of the family joins the army. So at 18, went off to Glencorse, did my selection, joined the army, and did my full colour service with them. So 24 and a half years. Yeah.
Do you think, I don't really know many people who've been to boarding school, to be honest. Do you think something like that prepared you for military life?
I'd say not, but there were, I know of three guys who served with me in the Highlanders who were all at the same boarding school. It was more of an outward bound kind of school in the middle of the Highlands, a place called Rannoch. Luckily it's closed down now. But I think my mother described it as being in the army is a bit like being at boarding school, but you get to play with weapons. So you're very much in an institutionalized life, and you've got your friends with you. You live there, you eat there, you do activities together, you do, everything's together. But obviously in the army we got to travel a lot.
There might have been a Freudian slip at the end of that. You said that it's closed down now, thank God. I take it you don't have fond memories of the place then.
Oh no, I do have fond memories, but it was just really remote. And when I was like in the middle of the Highlands, it took 3 hours to get there from my parents' house, and we were very much, climbing hills every weekend. So I suppose it probably did set us up for military life. I mean, okay, I joined the army. A couple of mates joined the Marines. But yeah, I suppose, as far as fitness levels go, there was a lot of skiing, there was a lot of hill walking, Duke of Edinburgh Award, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, probably, in hindsight, probably did set us up for military life.
So were you prepared for when you got to training?
God, no. I did the typical thing of a long time ago on TV. When to be frank, joined the army. So when I joined, I thought that the army was one. I didn't think that you had to join a different branch if you wanted to throw yourself out of a perfectly good aeroplane, or you drive a tank or whatever. And because I joined a family regiment, I didn't think for one moment, it never occurred to me that I was joining the infantry. So it wasn't until I was halfway through my basic, I was like, so when do we do tank training, or when do we, do this? And I'm like, mate, you're in the infantry. Everything's on foot. You carry everything. You might transfer to someone who throws themselves out of a perfectly good aeroplane, but no, mate, you're in the infantry. That's it. And I was like, oh, bummer. Didn't tell me that at the careers office. Yeah. At least my fitness levels are going to be good, but yeah. Yeah, something they miss off at the.
I mean, I've interviewed quite a few guys who were in the infantry, and I wouldn't say they mentioned that their training was quite, brutal. But I suppose, how can I put this? For infantry soldiers, training's got to be different. It is for, say, me in the artillery. Basic training, the basic military syllabus, got to be the same because you've got to learn all the same things, blah, blah, blah. Then it starts to differ,
Yeah, I mean, like basic training.
For the artillery, yeah.
I suppose, basic training, the first 3 months, I think it was, we all did the same. We all got taught how to march, how to get gassed in the chamber, how to run, build your fitness, all that stuff. And then, and that was in Glencorse in Edinburgh, just outside Edinburgh. And then we did our, combat training. I went to, I can't remember the name of the place. It was called ITB Euston, but it was, near Newcastle. And we spent almost every week in Otterburn. Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. The artillery now there, but yeah. And again, it was a bit like my boarding school. It was in the middle of nowhere. So all I remember is spending half my time in Otterburn, of whatever training we were doing, we were in Otterburn, so the full seasons. But I also remember, because we were in a Scottish regiment, and you obviously had, I think it was only the English and the Scottish that were there, but, everyone's out trying to outdo each other. So, being jocks, you've got to be stronger than the English. And I imagine that it was the same the other way around. There was so much fierce competition. And so when you were absolutely breathing out of it and you were, can't go any longer, your instructor would shout at you, look, if an Englishman can get further ahead than you, then, what are you doing back here? And then would push you and push you. So I don't know if that's the infantry mentality, but there was a lot of rivalry between, I suppose, countries. But
I think that's just not a bad English thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I know Albemarle. I know Albemarle very well. I lived there for 6 years,
and you know how middle of nowhere it is.
Well, it's the only camp I've ever been in where we got snowed in, which I found amazing. Literally, we couldn't leave camp for not for long, a couple of days, and then when it eased off a little bit, they were sending guys out with Land Rovers to tow, the old military road out the front.
Yeah.
It was just cars stranded all over it, and they're going out with Land Rovers and the Remy.
I just remember there's not many things I remember of that camp, but I do remember the PFT, the PFA, the mile and a half around the airfield, and it was so painful around because then you could see where everyone else was at the same time.
Yeah. And it's got a slight incline as well, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
Not that I run around it much. So, I mean, after training, you've gone to your battalion. What was that like turning up there? Because for most people, it's a bit of war.
Yeah, no, I did find it quite daunting. And much to my parents' annoyance, I joined in the ranks as a private soldier. So I think they expected me to commission. And my way of thinking was, I knew that, because when I joined the Queen's Own Highlanders, I still had family members in it, so I knew that they were coming up for an amalgamation, and I did want to commission. But the idea was I wanted at least 2 years as a private soldier to get better experience, and then if I was to commission, do that. And because of the changing of the regimental name, then I would be able to come back in to the same regiment. The amalgamation happened a lot quicker than anyone had anticipated. So I just stayed as a private soldier. But I actually had the best of both worlds, because and again, if you go back to the boarding school kind of thing, I joined as a private soldier, so all my friends were private soldiers and, in the ranks. But most of the officers' mess was made up of guys I'd gone to school with. So once I'd finished basic, and my first posting was Edinburgh, Dracourn Barracks. So during the week, I'd be out drinking with my mates, the ones I was serving side by side with. But at the weekends, I'd be off watching the rugby, essentially with old school friends, but they also happened to be in the officers' mess. So it was a bit weird. It took a while to get used to, but because of my accent and probably because how I dressed back then, very much, loafers, jeans, and shirt. A lot of the other friends of mine would, I don't know, almost trick younger soldiers into like banging up a salute for me, or why are you not bracing up to this officer? I'm like, I'm just a private soldier. And I get it. It was a bit of banter at the time, but I think as it wore on, I think it got a bit tiresome. But actually, you know what? I thoroughly enjoyed my time as a private soldier, or in the ranks. I mean, admittedly, I didn't get very far up the ranks over my career, but I got to do things that I probably wouldn't have done if I was an officer. I was anti-tank platoon, I was signals platoon, I was in a rifle company for quite a lot of it. I had some amazing postings, whether it be Canada. I did, I think all in total, I did 14 operational tours, most of which were in Northern Ireland. But I had a great laugh because I was side by side with, the guys that I'd gone through training with, or we'd grown up together. Whereas, had I been an officer, I'd probably done 2 years and then, buggered off somewhere, or, had way too much responsibility, that kind of thing.
I mean, you mentioned the amount of tours that you did there, 14 operational tours in your time. I mean, did Ireland, as everybody did in them days, Bosnia, as most people did as well, Iraq, first Gulf, and, all the usual stuff. My first operational tour really was the Maze prison tour I mentioned to it, and that was pretty uneventful. But it did, I was 18, 19. I just turned 19, really. And that kind of I wouldn't say it made me grow up. It made me think, hang on a minute, this isn't just mucking about in the naffy bar now. This is real. How was that for you?
Yeah, no, I was the same. So I think I only spent about 6 months in Edinburgh and then went off to Londonderry for 2 years, residential tour. And that definitely opened my eyes. I was 19 when I first went out there. And I remember, young soldier, not just on the streets, but, standing next to bollards at midnight waiting for a boy racer to come up or something. But I also remember we were, it was a good rotation because I think it was every 6 weeks. So 6 weeks patrolling, 6 weeks, different camp every 6 weeks or whatever, and then 6 weeks leads. I was like, it's brilliant. And as a private soldier, pop stars wages. But I do remember we had, so when was it? 95 to 97. So we had, it must have been 96 kind of time. We had the worst riots in Londonderry since Bloody Sunday. So we were in the Bogside and the Craigan. And I remember it was absolutely terrifying, but at the same time, it was quite good fun because you knew that the guy next to you was in the same boat. But, young kid being petrol bombed, lit up, rocks and everything being hurled towards you. The occasional shot flying out and stuff. But that was at a time where the ceasefire was on, then it was off, then it was on, it was off. So it was an interesting time, but I can still remember, the first time I got shot at. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, but I can give you a full description of, the car, the occupants, where I was, blah blah blah. But that was Northern Ireland, and as you said, Northern Ireland was the place we were at the time. So did a lot of tours back and forth, whether it be 3-month tours or 6-month tours. I think we covered most of Northern Ireland, 6 counties. And yeah, I visited the Maze once. I think we were up there during riot season or something, and we didn't go into the maze, but we kind of camped up outside. I vaguely remember, but I thought it was quite an extraordinary place because then you've got. Am I right in thinking it was the only prison in the UK that the rules of engagement were from soldiers rather than, it was guarded by soldiers, it wasn't guarded by the police.
Well, the perimeter was guarded by soldiers. The inside, we didn't go inside. We weren't allowed in there.
Yeah.
The inside was prison officers. They didn't. Well, one thing we did discover, all the towers had searchlights on, and if you turned them inwards and pointed them into the maze, into the windows, it used to wake the prisoners up, and they used to get really pissed off. But the other thing it also did was set off motion alarms, the light.
Right.
So they'd end up, their riot guys would end up running down the corridors and that just because we'd shone a light through the window. So we used to get told off that. We didn't do it very often. Every fucking night we did that.
Yeah.
But it was, the maze was, for the squaddy, I think it was one of the worst tours you could do because it was just staggering towers. But 9
also,
hours
was
a
it
day,
not
3 hours up one tower, 3 hours up another.
Surely a bit of an eye opener as well, because it wasn't. So each H block was a different terrorist organisation, and they probably did more activity from the inside.
I mean, the tower that looked over the car park, that was quite interesting because you got to see who was coming in and who was going out. You had a board to keep an eye on. When people came in, you'd get in touch with the QRF and say such and such is in, and they'd call a rat trap, so wait for them to come out and cut the road off at either end, search the car, and stuff like that. And plus, we still did patrols around the local area, and in down as far down as into Belfast, we'd still do vehicle patrols around Lisbon and stuff like that. Again, fairly quiet. It was the first time I'd ever come across 14-inch. We dropped them off somewhere, and then picked them up a couple of days later. And that was like, they're scary. Them. But I mean, I remember one. I forgot all about this. I've just remembered it. We were out in the mountains and we pulled into a farm, and we thought it was derelict. So we walked into the farmhouse to check it, and there was an old bloke sat there. He hadn't got a clue who we were. He was like a hermit. And we thought he was taking a piss. We were calling social services for him. Because he didn't have running water or anything. It was just bizarre.
Well, I remember. I remember the thing about London days, you had a very small, in the grand scheme of things, a Protestant area inside a Catholic city. Most of our, we were always in the Protestant area, but you would see people just throwing, I suppose it was a bit like the Gaza Wall, but, not as high. And you'd literally get Catholics throwing a petrol bomb over the wall into the Protestant side and vice versa. And you're just thinking, I get it, you're not going to move home, but there was pretty much barbed wire fence all the way around the Protestant area to keep them safe from the Catholics. It was just insane. And you're just thinking, where else would that possibly happen? And especially in this day and age, you'd never have that. So yeah, it was an eye-opener.
I listened to a podcast recently where two of the guys on the podcast went back to Northern Ireland to see what it was like now. And they spoke to people over there, and they were saying, "Oh, what was it like with this?" Last time I was here, and they were like, "Oh, you'll have to ask your parents about that. We don't want nothing to do with it. We'll never go back to that." And I mean, touch wood, it never does.
But yet the 3-day war is still standing there.
Yeah, but it's it was let's say it was a strange time. I mean, we moved from the maze up to Crumlin Road as well, and guarded the Crumlin Road, and that was bizarre. It really was.
I think one thing that was great about being in Northern Ireland is, the colour of the curbstones. So if they were tricolour, you knew you were going to be buggered, and if they were red, white, and blue, you knew you were quite safe. But also being in a Scottish regiment, I think we probably had probably an easier time, slightly. I mean, not 100%, but I think the Scottish Irish kind of connection may have helped slightly, but obviously not in every situation.
The last tour I did was in Besbrook at South Armagh, and that was a very different tour to my previous one. There was a lot more going on. Very different area. Stunningly beautiful, as most of Northern Ireland is, but very, very different. The atmosphere was different as well. I've been tempted to go back and look at the place. I don't know if I could. Never meet your heroes type of thing.
But I think that can be said the same for anywhere that we've been. I was in Germany for 11 years, and we all absolutely loved it. And you hear about people going back and visiting now, and it's not the same. Well, of course it's not. You haven't got 50,000 British troops there. You've got all the derelict buildings from when we used to be there, because there's no money left in the areas that we were. And I get it. Like, I'd love to go back to Canada, or places like that. I don't know if I would like to go back to Northern Ireland. I'd still be slightly sceptical.
Yeah, I think in my own mind I would. A friend of mine did it, and he went down to Crossmaglen. They were heading south, so they called into Crossmaglen, and they went into he had a pint in a pub, and the guy was like, looked at him and went, "Well, you're not from around here." And he says, "Well, no." He goes, "Well, be careful." He goes, and he'd explained who he was, and he said, and the barman basically thanked him for being in the army and being there to protect them during the Troubles. But the next thing that happened was a couple of guys walked in the bar, and the barman just looked over my mate and just said, "Don't speak."
I think that's the problem, though. Once a soldier, always a soldier, and it doesn't matter how much we try and change our appearance, we still give off that persona that we are, ex-military.
Yeah, you can, I can spot a veteran a mile off. Yeah. He was in the army. Sometimes just by the way they walk.
I like working in security. You see them all the time.
Yeah. I mean, so Northern Ireland tours, did you do Bosnia as well?
So I did 2 tours of Bosnia. I did one of Macedonia, although, so Macedonia was a bit strange because we went there we had monitors in Kosovo because it was unstable, and then the idea we'd be held in Macedonia and rescue the monitors out of Kosovo when it all went south. And the weird thing is, we're only meant to be there for like 10 days, 2 weeks, and then we basically stayed there for 7 months. So we got there, it was minus 40 something, and then we left and it was plus 40 something. So that was a bit of an odd tour, but we got to see. I mean, it was, I suppose, it's a bit like Bosnia. The Balkans are a bit of a forgotten war. So ethnic cleansing, refugees, pretty hardcore kind of the post, ethnic cleansing kind of thing. So there was a lot of poverty and stuff, and so that was quite harsh. Not much, there wasn't much fighting. It was, collecting up weapons, rebuilding the place, trying not to step on a landmine, things like that. And then, I did 2 tours of Iraq. I did Telic 7, Telic 12, and then I did 1 tour of Afghan, but it was Herrick 19/20. So just before the close down and then during the close down.
I mean, back to the Bosnia bit. For me personally, when you just said something there that really, I'm so annoyed that people have just forgot about it.
It's really weird though, because I agree.
Be forgotten.
Well, I suppose. Really, I mean, I've got friends who were in Bosnia 1994 as I was joining the army. So they were there. I think it was the Gordon Highlanders. And they went out there with the UN. And my father was there at the time as an aid worker. And so I know how miserable a time those guys had, and they were under contact a lot. But essentially the war was about, ethnic cleansing and religion, and I think it was a really miserable time. But yes, by the time I went there, it was, as I said, picking up weapons, confiscating, trying to, level it out. But I remember doing a patrol into the hills, and we came across a farmer, same as, like you were saying, an island. The guy was like, "Has the war finished?" And we're like, "Finished 30 years ago." But yeah, no, I don't know why no one talks about it. Maybe, I mean, there was definitely media coverage of it.
Plenty.
But I suppose, I don't know. I mean, and we certainly had tons of troops over there. We had, Jim Davidson did his usual thing of coming over to visit us. I don't know why no one talks about it. I suppose, I don't know. Maybe
for me
didn't
personally,
go on long enough.
I was there in '95 when we changed from UN to, we took our bright blue berries off and put our normal berries on, and we, the datum agreement and stuff like that. We said to the Serbs, "Stop it, or we're going to slap your ass," and they went, "Going to try it," so we did, and it stopped. And it's, for me, it's the only tour that really affects me. And most of the time it's not from what you've seen, but from what you have not seen, but you knew it happened. Like you'd see someone one week and you'd go back a week after and their house is burnt out and you know they're not alive anymore. That type of thing. Seeing the hardship that people suffered, and it was fucking madness what was happening. It really, really was.
I wonder
going back a few years, yeah.
I wonder if the reason it's not talked about is because, unlike Northern Ireland, Iraq, and Afghan, there wasn't a record amount of numbers of troops killed in action.
There was more killed due to road traffic accidents than enemy fire, unfortunately. But again, we were out there doing a different type of job with the UN. You were curtailed. I mean, that was the other thing that bothered a lot of people, because it was UN. We couldn't fucking do what we wanted to do. You'd see people coming under fire, and if you weren't coming under fire, you couldn't do nothing about it.
But I remember, but I remember, like in Macedonia, because Macedonia wasn't involved in the war or what was happening in Kosovo. So the Americans were dropping bombs in Kosovo while we watched from Macedonia. We were down at Skopje airport. And you then had all the refugees trying to come into Macedonia, understandably. But they were basically putting in a hard stop and just wouldn't let people in. So you then had busloads of refugees on the border, half a K from your position, but you were very visibly able to see it. And I suppose the hardship was you couldn't do anything about it. It wasn't our fight. We were just there to, residents of Macedonia waiting to get the call to go into Kosovo. But, too much diplomatic stuff back and forward. So I think, and because my father had been in Bosnia during the war as an aid worker, I then wanted to get involved and see if, go and visit a refugee camp or something like that. But yeah, that was heartbreaking, because there was no forward system for them. They were literally just being put into a camp and say, right, this is your new home, get on with it. And so as soldiers, we had no control whatsoever. We just had to watch it happen. And I think that's what, I think maybe those of us that were there probably want to talk about it more, but because, as we said, it's a bit of a forgotten war, there's no one really to talk to about unless you actually served there. And people are more interested in Iraq and Northern Ireland.
I mean, the good side for the Brits, or for the Brits and the Yanks. I throw the Yanks in as well. For the Brits, is that I consider that the end of the Bosnia conflict, we won and we did well. and we came out of it with, we'd come out with smelling of roses, and then that led on to us having lots of confidence. And in Kosovo, we sorted Kosovo out to a point, and then Sierra Leone, stuff like that. And the good things that happened there, and then it all went wrong. we rocked up Iraq in 2003. But I was there 2003. We won the war. Quite proud of that. I don't care what anyone says. And then it went wrong. Then it went fucking seriously wrong. Let's say I think we outstayed our welcome. To say a little bit, we should have left a lot. There was lots of things we should have done. We shouldn't have got rid of the Ba'ath Party. We should have employed them. The infrastructure was already there. We shouldn't have tried to recreate Iraq into a Western civilization, because it's never going to work. And I've spoken about that before on the podcast. So, I mean, what was your first tour of Iraq like? So, I mean, if you'd never been there before, the fucking one thing smells.
Yeah,
I don't care what anyone says. The place smells.
Yeah, so I was in Basra, so we had raw sewage flowing down the high street, if that's what you can call it. But we were in Warriors, which was quite fun. But we were also in a position that, because we were the only infantry company that was in Basra. We were the only armoured infantry company that was in Basra. Basically, no one moved without us. So if someone wanted we had a 3-lettered American organization near us, and they wanted to go out all the time in their SUVs, but they weren't allowed unless we had a big warrior behind them. But we also had snatched Land Rovers, so it was quite scary in that, if a warrior wasn't working, we'd take a snatched Land Rover. So you've got this massive armored vehicle that you feel absolutely safe in, and then you're driving in a snatched Land Rover behind it. But it was an interesting tour because Tally 7, so that was 2004, 2005. So not long after you'd been there. So yeah, it was still pretty hairy. We got mortared every night without doubt. You could almost set your watch by it. We were in tents behind the Chateau Arab Hotel. So most of the mortars were aimed at the hotel, went over the top of the hotel, and landed in our tents. But I do remember my best friend Guy McDonald and I. We were always in the smoking area at 10 o'clock, and the smoking area probably had more concrete around it than our tents. And you could almost set your watch by it. You'd light up a cigarette at 10 o'clock, and then suddenly you'd hear the dudum, and you'd look up, and you're like, oh, right on time. And that was pretty much every night. Because we didn't carry body armor and helmet until 6 o'clock at night. And also, I wouldn't say it was laid back. There wasn't so much structure in place that early on. So we had sleeves rolled up.
Yeah.
We were still walking around in TOSs, which, nothing better than being in blistering heat wearing a big woolly hat on your head. It was a Christmas tour, so it wasn't too hot, but yeah, too hot for me. And I was signals platoon at the time, so I spent most of the time in the ops room. But I was also my OC signaller, so I was out on the ground a lot with him. So yeah, that was quite hairy. A couple of IED strikes, quite a few IED strikes. So yeah, that was a bit of an eye opener. We lost a good friend up in Alamara, and then
it was bad up there.
Yeah, the bandit country, and then my second tour, which was Telic 12, was 18 months later. Completely different ball game. It completely calmed down. I was sent down to near the Iranian border, some complete random outpost. We had to buy ice off the locals. And it was, I don't know, I vaguely remember we were kind of given this building and said, right, fortify it yourself. So we spent the first 6 weeks digging sand and filling bags and fortifying the defences ourselves. And instead of having air conditioning, we had marble floors to lie on. I wouldn't say the danger was definitely not over. We had a couple of IED strikes, but the shooting and the mortars was definitely nowhere on the same scale as the first tour. But there was just a small amount of us. Like, I think I was away with the platoon, and then I think halfway through the tour I got casevaced with heat exhaustion, and I ended up being the ops room manager back in, what was the camp? Bastion? No, Bastion's of Afghan.
Basra Palace.
No, Shaiba log base. Working with battle group up there, so bit better. But I do remember, so from the first tour we were sleeping in bunk beds and tents, and then when I was in Shaiba, we had these horrible coffins. So it was concrete breeze blocks around a mattress on the floor, and then above you had a metal plate. I think it had either metal plate or Kevlar, and then sandbags on top. So being quite a tall person, and you're sleeping like that, and you don't sleep with your helmet on, and so you suddenly wake up in the middle of the night because you can hear explosions, and you whack your head off a steel frame. You had to lie down on the floor and then roll into your mattress. But again, you're in a tent, so that was pretty miserable. But no, the second tour was considerably better than the first one. But at the same time, even with the first one, I knew that I had the troops I had with me, that we were all side by side, we were all best mates with each other. So I think that made it considerably better. And then, and obviously Jim Davison came out to do his piece anyway. But I don't know. I kind of enjoyed the first tour better, maybe because we had more going on. And I think we felt
you were doing your job.
Yeah, we felt kind of more in the fight. Whereas the second time, we spent a lot of time just driving around in massive, heavy mobility vehicles and living on marble floors.
Just those taxis and bodyguards. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, moving on from Iraq then, Afghanistan. That would have been a very different tour to what you'd experienced in Iraq.
Yeah, and actually, to be honest, the only reason I went to Afghan is because I remember being back in Germany and all the guys so the battalion had done Herrick, I think they did Herrick 8 and 14 or something, so they were both super hairy tours. And a lot of the young soldiers had gone off to that, and I'd stayed behind in Germany. I think the first tour I did, Funeral Party. Great job, that is. And then the second time, I can't remember what, but I didn't deploy. And then, so by the time Herrick 1920 came out, I was just basically fed up of all these young soldiers saying to me, "Oh, where's your Afghan medal?" I'm like, "What?" And the other, I don't know, 7 or 8 don't count for anything. So I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
Send me out to Afghan. So I only spent 4 months out there. But I was helping teaching RSOI training package on the ranges. So I was doing range safety. And that was literally all I did. And was a resident of the NAFI. My Afghan tour didn't amount to anything. I was literally in Camp Bastion on the ranges. Yeah, it didn't really amount to anything. Early starts, early finishes.
Somebody's got to do them jobs.
Well, they do, but I think, I mean, it was kind of, it was nice because we got to play around on the ranges, and we did have great fun, and also we met so many people because you've obviously still got so many people coming into theatre, but I'm trying to think. We still had the internal threat, so there was a lot of internal threat going on. Afghan soldiers trying to take out their own instructors, whether the British or Americans. I think the Estonians had a few internal. We were obviously trying to teach the Afghans, and a few of them had slipped through from the Taliban net, kind of thing. So the internal threat was very much still there. Of course, we still had guys deployed out, but there was quite a few shootings in camp. Blue on blue kind of thing, or blue on green. I can't remember which way around it is. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because I remember Gary Barlow came out to do a concert, and that was quite fun. And he was meant to be entertaining for 2 days. And in the end, he could only entertain for the second day because we were halfway through the concert on the first night, and then there was an incident in camp. So don't get me wrong, it's a vast camp. Every nation was in there. But you automatically think the threat is on the outside. And in fact, the threat very real was in camp as well. Bearing in mind, I'm trying to think. Yeah, so we carried weapons on us all the time because I was working with the Rangers. We managed to just carry a Glock on us, but we had it on us all the time.
I was lucky enough not to go to Op Eric, and I do consider myself lucky for that. So I didn't appreciate the size of Bastion until I watched a documentary a couple of weeks back about them closing it down, and I was amazed. The size of the place, and the things that were there, like water. There are water plants and scrap yards and all sorts of stuff like that.
There was
they were immense.
I think it was a plastic bottle recycling plant at one point because they realised we were going through so many bottles of water, and then just basically adding it to the burn pile. Someone said, "Well, why don't we just bottle our own water?" No, it was enormous. I think there was 3 bastions in the end, all in one, and also the Americans had Leatherneck. So Leatherneck was, as you'd expect from any other American base, it was vast. And then we had us, the Danish were there, Estonians, I suppose every nation must have been there.
Yeah. Plus, you'd have had all the civvy contractors going through there, and not just the CP guys, but all the logistics guys and stuff like that.
But weirdly, they had a hotel on.
Living in there.
They had a hotel on camp as well. A lot of the KBR, workers would stay there. But yeah, and given the fact that it doesn't matter how many troops were there, we had at least, I think we had 2 airfields. I think the Americans had one and we had one. But it was the main hub in and out of the country. So all those troops plus a massive airport. Yeah, it was insane.
It's a whole city in the middle of the desert type of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, I suppose it's the same as Ibiza. We had local taxis, because, your NAFI was on the opposite side of camp or whatever. So you'd have, I remember, like small minivans were your taxis. It's a free taxi service. But we had bus stops. So you'd be in your uniform with your weapon attached to you, carrying your body armor and helmet, standing at a bus stop on a dusty road in this vast camp to take you to the NAFI. And do you remember the coins we had, the little paper, the cardboard pugs? Your coin was a cardboard cutout that said 25 cent on it, and then on the other side it would say the NAFI or something like that. It's just insane. It was a completely different world. And I think to be honest, it probably took a while to get used to. And I'm trying to remember, when was the phalanx gun introduced? So yeah, Iraq, we came under attack all the time while we were in camp, both tours. I'm trying to remember if Afghan had. It definitely had threats coming into camp, but I'm trying to remember if they had those big naval guns in Afghan as well. They must have done. But
I'm not sure about Afghan. I mean, if somebody knows and mentions in the comments below, we'll find out about that. But
yeah,
my last tour of Iraq was 2006, and we were at Basra Palace there. You know, we were getting motored every night there, but they were just flying over.
yeah,
You know, and it's similar to what you were saying there about the smoking area. We'd end up sat in the smoking area, and there was a few of us had laptops, and I'd sent home on eBay. I'd bought on eBay a Switch, and I got sent back out. And we'd sit there on our computers playing Red Alert. You know, a bunch of us just sat there smoking, playing Red Alert, while getting Chinese mortars thrown at us. It was just fucking unreal.
yeah.
It was just like, what the hell's going on now? You know, stop it! I'm winning this game. It was a bizarre place. I'd like to say, well, I wouldn't like to say it was beautiful. It was just weird, you know. I mean, at the end of 2003, at the end we've won. You know, we were driving around the place and almost treated as heroes. One of the lads, half the battery went down to, or half the regiment, our battery anyway, went down to the L4 to guard the oil infrastructure down there, and the rest of us took the vehicles up to Shiba. And one of the lads was driving back from Shiba every day to Basra Palace, where our HQ was, and stuff like that. And someone had passed a message to him, found an off license, and we were like, "What? Fucking off license in Basra?" That night, off we went. Got permission. We didn't do it off the back. We got permission. They said, "Right, there's no beer from tomorrow." We said, "Well, we didn't think there was any beer anyway." They said, "Right, we've got one night to get some, and that's it." So me and this lad, Dewey, jumped in a Land Rover, and we literally drove into the centre of Basra. You know, didn't bat an eyelid. Found this off license. He went in to get a load of beer, literally carrying crates and crates out, and the people who were in there carrying crates out. It was, even though we'd just been through the war and everything like that, it was the only time that apart from when the American helicopters turned around and started coming back towards us, that I felt a bit unsafe, because a car pulled up behind the Rover and drove into it. And then a load of locals appeared, and I thought, shit, I'm done for here. And it wasn't. It was a drunk driver in fucking Iraq. It was a drunk driver, drove into the back of the Land Rover. The locals came out, grabbed him out of the van, grabbed him out of his car, and gave him a good hiding. We threw the beer in there, and shot off like a bat out of hell.
I can imagine.
And then buried the beer off him, buried the bottles off him. But that was a strange one. So what was it like getting back to the battalion then after all
that? You know, well, so during Iraq and Afghan, you know, we were based in Germany, so, you know, whale of a time. Yeah, and
where were you?
I don't know. I was in Fallenbostel, so we'd taken over from the Black Watch. No, it was amazing. Just life in Germany was amazing, but you know, a lot of nights out, and then when we got our leave, a lot more nights out, but in the UK.
Yeah, big drinking culture in America, even back in Germany, even back, you know, even when I got there in the 80s, it was a massive drinking culture, and it didn't seem to subside.
You know, kind of going back to the boarding school question, is that, you know, I never got homesick when I was in the army, probably because of boarding school. So, you know, when we all came back from tour and everyone was like, "Oh, I can't wait to go home," I was like, you know, we'll get home when we get home, you know. But, you know, at the same time, when I was in Germany, I lived in the corporal's mess, so you know, every night was a party anyway, and you kind of wanted to go home just to have a break.
Just to give your kidneys a bit of a break.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it was great. It was great to get home, but we had such an amazing time in Germany that it was like, you know, get to go home, fine. But then, I suppose to a certain degree, you get given so much leave that you're almost begging to go back to work, because you're like, you know, my body can't take any more alcohol. But yeah, or, you know, there were times where you just wanted to sleep non-stop. You could sleep for a week because you're so tired, but then, you know, someone's like, "Oh, come for another beer," and I'm like, okay, why not?
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, like, looking back on it, I suppose, decompression in Cyprus never worked. It was like forced fun on a cold beach. If you came back from tour in November and you'd be told to sit on the beach in Cyprus and go and enjoy yourself, you're like, really?
Yeah,
but I suppose also
I've not met. Just jump in there. I've not met one person throughout. I've done 100 and what, 100, nearly 130 interviews over the last 2 years, and not one person has said anything good about decompression.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Through Cyprus, it was just a waste of time. Good idea, but badly implemented, and wasn't. If it was implemented as it should have been, to decompress it should have been there for a little bit longer, and there should have been proper mental health awareness and this and the other there. But it wasn't. It was just go in there, get pissed, fight each other, then you can go back.
Well, that was the thing. You haven't, in theory, you hadn't touched any alcohol for 6-7 months, and then less your R&R, and then you go to Cyprus and there's like, here's a couple of beers. Don't try and kill anyone. You're like, really? Infantry unit in Cyprus, a couple of beers is enough to finish anyone off. And then, we had the Padre, but did anyone want to talk to the Padre apart from get his Haribo? As you said, it was a great idea. It just wasn't very well executed. But at the same time, when we came back from tour, a couple of us had, a cry and a whinge and reflected on we'd lost a friend or we'd lost a couple of friends. We did kind of talk about it, but it was usually over a beer, and usually so much so that you couldn't understand exactly what someone else was saying. Or there was a lot of, trim had been introduced when we were in Iraq, but there was a lot of like, yeah, well, we're all in the same boat. Let's just move on it. And I think that's why I don't think it's to do with, burly men in an infantry regiment. I just don't think anyone spoke about it because they probably either didn't want to or didn't feel that someone actually cared. I'm not saying that people didn't go to medical services for it, but, talking to your mate who was in the same desert as you, in the same tour, in the same firefight kind of thing, you kind of like, yeah, you know what? Let's just have a beer and forget about the last 6 months. And then someone will say something amusing like, oh, do you remember when Pizza Hut took a direct hit with a mortar that night? And like, oh, yeah. And you laugh and joke about it. But no one, at the time, no one thought, we lost such and such. Let's talk about it. Because people were on a high, we'd just come back. Everyone was enjoying themselves. They didn't want to lower the tone or bring the mood down by talking about a friend of ours that had just been killed or blown up and life-changing injuries or whatever. We did talk about it, but we didn't talk about it in depth or in I don't know, in an emotional finding way. We spoke about it in a jokey manner. So he'll be all right.
Yeah, but I mean that's the way the military is. It's the gallows humour and this that and other, and that's trained into us. To be honest,
and it's a bit like mourning. It's a bit like mourning. So you lose a mate out there, whichever battlefield you've been on, you lose a mate, and your sergeant major at the time says, don't mourn him now. We'll mourn him when you get back. So you put it out of your mind. Yes, everyone's upset. You toast a can of Coke that night or whatever it is. Have an extra cigarette. But you don't talk about it. And then when you get back to UK, Germany, wherever, Cyprus, again, no one talks about it because it's almost out of your system. It's I lost my best mate when I was based in Catterick. Now that was the suicide, but I was in Macedonia at the time. So yes, I was horrendously upset at the time because I heard about it via a phone call. But I then spent the next 5 months I didn't forget him. He was my best mate. But you're kept so busy that he's not at the forefront of your mind, if that makes sense. And because no one's talking about him or whoever you've lost, it's not you don't think about it. You just don't think about it as often as maybe you would think, because it's been a traumatic incident, a traumatic time in your life. But because the world has kind of become busy, life has got busy, and you're trying to celebrate that you're back from tour and, have that beer with your mates and enjoy yourself. But no one talks about it. So I think it's kind of backwards. You want to think about it, but you end up not thinking about it because you don't want to get upset. And then you don't want to upset everyone else.
You put it in you put it in that little box. You can't compartmentalize it, and then the next thing happens, and that goes in the box as well. And then the next thing happens, and that goes in the box as well.
Exactly. And you think,
one day, both.
Yeah, well, exactly. So you think, I'm going to come back to that box. I'm going to open up Pandora's box, and I'm going to, cry for 24 hours. I'm going to think about it. But you never do. And then, as you said, years down the line, you suddenly, the box explodes, and then you don't know what to do because it's all happened at the same time, rather than if you remembered, almost remembered each friend, along the way, you wouldn't have to just bottle it up.
Going back to exactly what you said before, if you were allowed or you felt as though you could mourn them there and then, or very soon after, and go through that process, which is why we have a mourning process. It's emotional, it's psychological, it's closure, and sometimes you don't get that closure, especially if like you implied there about being in a firefight and your best mate's just been took out next to you. You're trained to carry on. Leave him. It's too late.
Exactly.
Carry on, in the firefight. And that's all well and good. That's what we joined. We joined the army. We do that. That's what we're trained to do.
But also, I think that
you've still got to manage that as well.
But I think also something that's never discussed or very rarely discussed is survivor's guilt. Why did he die, but I'm still alive? He was a better soldier than me. And it was just bad luck that he got hit and you didn't. And I think, survivor's guilt, especially now as veterans, looking back, you're thinking, why was it him? Why not me? And so, again, that's a kind of, I suppose, mental health, but it's a thought process that no one ever thinks about.
It's brought up a bit more and more now. I mean, like, I was never involved in anything like this, previous to the last 2 years. And none of it really, I never really give any of it any thought, really. I'd lost friends while in service, and lost friends out of service, and this, that, and the other. And it wasn't until I started doing the podcasts that I started to appreciate mental health more. And again, I've said it before on the podcast as well. Just the phrase mental health, I'm not comfortable with that. So I've found it now to be a bit of a buzzword, and people are jumping on that bandwagon. You'll see people on social media who are basically fucking, I wouldn't say trying to make money, but there's people out there doing it, or they're trying to promote themselves and use the mental health thing as not as a crux, but as a tool to make their life better. And I've seen that, and I think that's disgusting. But I've learned more and more over the last 2 years of what people are going through, and little things like doing this podcast, people listening to it. I get comments, not all the time, but now and again, saying thank you for doing this. It's helped me. I've had phone calls where I've sat and talked to people for a couple of hours at a time. And I don't mind people ringing me. It doesn't happen that often. I don't really advertise my phone number. But before I started this, I would never have picked the phone up if somebody rang me. I just wouldn't have. I didn't recognise that number. I'm not, no way, because I didn't want to talk to people. Started doing this. I went through a bit of an episode myself, where I ended up under counselling, which is what I needed. I didn't realise I had issues, because sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't know.
No, I
It's
absolutely
until
agree.
that last minute.
When I had my final medical before leaving the Highlanders, I remember my MO. It was nuts. He was like, right, some genius in the government has come up with 3 questions, and however you answer these 3 questions will determine whether you've got PTSD or not. And we kind of just both looked at each other and were like, really? 3 questions? And so I answered these 3 questions. I can't remember what they were. There were things like, do you still react to a loud noise suddenly? If you're walking down the street and you hear a car backfiring, do you take cover? That kind of thing. Do you have sleepless nights? Do you think about things that have happened in your career? And I remember at the time he said, according to these 3 questions, you don't have PTSD. We can't diagnose you with PTSD. However, with the amount of tours that you've done in an infantry unit and the things that you've seen and done, it'd be a miracle if you didn't have PTSD. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool. And so I kind of left the army. I was like, cool, I don't have PTSD. I'm now, I think, a bit like putting things into the box is, I suddenly realized I've continued to go to the Army Navy every year with the same bunch of friends. So, if I did have any mental health issues, they were exasperated by going to the Army Navy and getting drunk, one weekend every year. It wasn't until a couple of years ago, one of my friends in that group said, oh, I've reached out to Op Courage and they're really good. And I was like, okay, cool. And so I then, and I think it was his wife had said, you know what? You're running a mental health charity. Go and get yourself checked out. And I was like, but I'm fine. They're like, peace of mind, whatever you want to call it. You can't be there for another veteran looking after their mental health if yours isn't in check first. And I was like, okay. So I had to jump through a lot of hoops. I had to, and I get the frustration with veterans who are reaching out for help. So I eventually now I do a talking therapies every 2 weeks or something, and it's great. But the person who is my therapist doesn't understand the military, and even after the first, and I think a lot of veterans get this. After the first session, she said, I'm not going to lie, I don't understand a single word you've just said about your career in the last 30 minutes. I'm like, that's fine. Just listen to me. And so I've done that and I feel better. But the thing about it is, I'm seeing a therapist for 2 reasons. Firstly, so that my mental health is in check so I can look after other people. But also, my father died the morning of the Queen. So I can't remember what date that was. I should remember. And I remember, so I was at my father's bedside, said my goodbyes, and then the following morning I get a phone call saying, when can you be in Windsor because the Queen's just died? Because I then went there as a security task and spent 10 days or 2 weeks, however long it was, at Windsor, standing there in a suit with lots of people upset the Queen had just died. And I was like, well, hold on, my father's just died. But again, it's a bit like being on tour. I wasn't given time to mourn. I was straight back into work. So I think what's happened is over the last 3 years, I've been thinking about mental health because of the charity. I'm, more conscious about wanting to talk about my feelings, but also trying to get veterans to talk about their feelings. And we're all talking about mental health. And then suddenly I've, something has just clicked in my head. Well, hold on. You haven't mourned your father yet. I was like, oh shit. Yeah. So I'm now seeing a therapist mostly for grief, grievance counselling of losing my father, who also helped me set up my charity. But at the same time, I get the chance to talk about my military life as well.
Have you found this might be? It's just popped into my head. I mean, when the Queen died, it affected a lot of the country. I wouldn't say when Charles pops his slugs that he'll have the same reaction, unfortunately. But it did. I mean, I found myself sat there watching stuff and fucking crying, thinking, what the fuck am I crying for? Why am I this upset? But everybody, she was such a part of our lives. So I think
absolutely.
everyone.
But I remember being on the TV. I remember being on
that feeling as well as your dad's. You know what I mean? So it's going to be compounded and made worse for you as well. And then you've just got to get on with it.
I remember in the morning going off to pick up my father's belongings from the hospital, and getting back to his house. And I was at his house, chilling out, having a coffee or something. And then I remember his widow turning around and said, "Oh my God, have you seen the news? The Queen's just died." I'm like, "So is my father. So is your husband." But the Queen, and it kind of took me back to, do you remember when 9/11 happened? It was all over every news channel. And people were just memorized. They're like, everyone was just fixated on the TV. And so we were watching basically 24 hours of every channel was covering the Queen's passing. A bit like when 9/11 happened. And so all this is kind of rushing in, like your commander-in-chief has just died, the one monarch that you've known all your life, all this kind of stuff. She was the boss that everyone talks about. She's just died, a completely new chapter in our lives is just about to start. And at the same time, I'm trying my hardest to try and think about my father's just died. And it wasn't like he had a heart attack and died. He was in hospital for, I think, about a week. He'd been told he had 9 months to live, that it was reduced to, a couple of months to a couple of weeks to a couple of days, all within a couple of days. So we got to say our goodbyes to him, but nothing could prepare you for when it actually happens. And so I'm trying to, pick in my brain all the happy times I've had with my father while in his house, looking at all the picture frames. And then suddenly in the background, I've got, we're sorry to announce that, Queen Elizabeth has just died. And I'm like, I've got too much going on.
Yeah.
It was an absolute overload. And I was like, do I cry for my father or do I cry for the Queen? And I think also what probably didn't help is basically brought up in, I don't think there's any other word for or expression as stiff upper lip kind of family. So
yeah,
when my father was dying, it wasn't like we were, so we weren't giving him a hug or anything like that. We, a kiss on his forehead, and we shook his hand and we said, "Thanks very much." Whereas when I got to the Queen's funeral, or I got to Windsor, there were people throwing themselves at the Windsor gates, breaking down in tears. And I'm like, it wasn't even your mother, but she had that profound effect. And so, yeah, and it was just complete sensory overload. It's like,
yeah.
So I would imagine you just blanked it all out, and it wasn't like
I think I did. I think I did. One person dies, blank it out, get on with the job, come back to it later. But then I never got back to it.
So, I mean, how did you find your transition from leaving the army?
Well, I kind of cheated. I transferred into the Army Reserves. So I'm still a reservist now, part-time, with the Royal Signals. So I was happy that when, because I'd done my full colour service, I left my pension and I still get my pension, which is great. So financially, really cool. I did the usual infantry thing and go off and do my close protection course and my resettlement. But I also joined the reserves. So the reserves was great as a networking tool and kind of gradually leaving the army. You know, I've gone full term and then I'm only doing it, Tuesday nights and weekends. But I still enjoy being in the uniform. I'm also a ski instructor with the army. I thought, keep on getting the MOD to pay for my skiing, so I'll join the reserves. But also, at that point, I hadn't set up the charity yet. But now that I have, in hindsight, having your army ID card, your mod 90, still helps so much. When your mates on camp, you think, oh, I'm just going to pop in the camp and see my mates, catch up on them. You still get your ID card to get into camp. And I think my car pass was still in date. So that was good. But, as having the Veterans Charity means that I can still go on to army camps and tell them about mental health and charity and everything else and see my friends. Not at the moment because they're in Cyprus for the next 2 years. But, I've got other friends. And then, so that was good because I'm still in uniform, but I'm still a civilian kind of thing. Close protection, as you can imagine, is all ex-military. Well, not all ex-military, but 90% of it is ex-military. So it feels like I almost haven't left because I'm now surrounded by a bunch of guys that I either served with or we all have that same mentality and understanding. And being able to get your pension every month at the age of 40. When did I leave? 40. I think it was 42 when I left. I thought, God, not many people give you a full pension at this age, but no. Still got to go and find a job. But I think also, I think also the Army Reserves also. I admit I was probably quite similar to a lot of others that have been in that position. You suddenly have the rug pulled out from underneath you, and you're like, So I remember you get chaired out of camp. The CO's driver drives you home or to the pub. I can't remember which one. But then the following day, you're not. It's weird. You get up at 7 o'clock in the morning or whatever time, and you think, "Oh, I haven't got a job to go to. What do I do?" You can do anything you want. I was like, but that's all good and well. But what do I do? I should be on parade in an hour, whatever. So that is very weird. It's coming, but nothing prepares you for when you have the, you kind of wake up and you're like, I could go for a walk. I could do anything. But I'm, there's that huge thing. I've been doing the same thing for almost 25 years. And then now I'm not. So that was really hard. And I think that's what was good about the reserves is that even if I couldn't find a job straight away, at least I could throw myself at least half time into the Army Reserves. So I would have an employment and I would still be wearing the uniform. I think at the time I had a few close protection gigs set up, but, a weekend here and a day there, it really wasn't the same thing. And I think that's probably what everyone struggles with. You've had that institutionalized structure, and having structure is really good. But when you're on parade at 8 o'clock in the morning, you do an hour's PT, then you go and check your emails for an hour and a half. You then go to the smoking shelter or whatever, and then you've got lunch, and then everything's very structured. At 6 o'clock in the morning, you can hear the piper and the flag going up. At 6 o'clock at night, you can hear the piper again and the flag coming down. So it's all very structured. And then suddenly, one day, you're like, I can't hear the piper. What do you mean someone's not putting the flag up and down? Someone's not telling me that, someone's not shouting at me for being on parade. And actually, I remember when I went back to battalion, I was talking to the troops, and they'd be like, "Oh, this is amazing! You've got out. You don't have to get up at crack of dawn to do an hour's fitness." And I was like, "Believe me, you will miss that." I mean, my fitness levels since I left the army, I mean, they were never great in the first place. I mean, really weren't great in the first place, but I kind of miss doing that forced exercise at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, because it might have felt miserable at the time, but actually it was doing you a world of good. And again, it was keeping into the structure. Someone says to me now, "Let's go for a run." I'm like, "Why?" I've been stupid enough to sign myself up to the London Marathon next year. I'm like, why did I do that? I don't run. I hate fitness. But, it adds structure.
I would imagine for you as well, your whole life had been like that, boarding school, then the military. So that's compounded as well, because you've literally all you've had in your life structure. I've spoken to loads of guys who've suffered the same thing. When they've left the military, they've lost purpose, they've lost a sense of self. But not everyone. I mean, I interviewed an ex-RAF pilot, and he suffered after he got out. But in the end, he says what worked for him was to accept the chaos. I know a lot of guys. I know definitely one guy who ended up in therapy because of the fear of being late. And he couldn't abide, and I still can't. If I walk in at work late, I feel guilty. I just do. I hate having time off for being, ill, because I feel as though because you never did that in the army. You never rang up. Not once in 27 years. They got me boss.
No, but interesting.
I'm not coming in because I'm not feeling well.
Never late for work. And if I was ever late for work, I would always phone the guardroom and say, "Look, I'm really sorry, I've been stuck in traffic, whatever." Never late for work, but for social occasions. So, like when I go to the Army Navy every year, they all tell me we're meeting at the pub at 9 o'clock in the morning, knowing fine well that I won't get there before 10 in the morning. Socially, I'm always late, But work-wise, and I see it now, even in my civil employment, all the ex-military guys will turn up 5 minutes before 5 minutes. They'll all turn up. Say we start at 7, they'll all turn up at say 1:45, 10:10. And they don't mind waiting until after, the end point at the end of the day. Whereas there are some civilians who literally will stand outside the door of work and like, right, it's about 30 seconds to, okay, and then we'll start work. And then at the end of the day, we'll be tapping on the, at the door, waiting to leave. And when the first person comes in, they'll be like, right, I'm off. And I think that, so I bumped into a friend that I'd been in the Highlanders with, I don't know, 6 years ago. I think it was just after I left, randomly bumped into each other. And he was like, the expression of fucking civvies. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, his job starts at 8 o'clock in the morning. So all the ex-military guys turn up at 7:30 in the morning. They have their cigarette, their coffee, their bacon sandwich, and they're all good to go for 7:45, 7:50. But then the civilians that work with him, they'll turn up at 8:15 and then still expect to have their cigarette, their coffee, their bacon sandwich, their natter, and they won't start work until 8:30, 8:45. And you're like, work starts at 8 o'clock. Like, well, you've had your bacon sandwich. I turned up an hour before you. And I see it quite a lot. I think it's not as much as I used to, but it definitely stands out. You're thinking, don't get me wrong, not every ex-soldier is that time proficient, but the majority of us are. And I think that's why, love it or not, a lot of ex-military guys make good employers or employees, because their timekeeping is going to be good.
Not just that; it's the self-discipline. I mean, that's not to say everyone's like that. I mean, to be honest, I'm not. If my job doesn't really, I haven't been able to roll over much of my military past into the job I do now. I've tried; it doesn't fit. I have to adjust. I suffer from that to start with. The way I had explained to me is, all right, you're a veteran, but you're in their world now. You've got to adjust to them. You've got to adjust to the civvies. They don't have to adjust to you. It's as simple as that. You can still keep your identity. You can still keep your foundations, your beliefs, your morals, but you're in their world. They were never in your world, but now you're in their world. You've got to fit in.
Yeah, and I saw a really interesting. There was a very interesting post on LinkedIn I was reading today. I say reading today. I mean, it could have been posted a week ago, but by the time I get them, but it was, you've built yourself for the military, and so when you get out, you do have a loss. You feel that you don't belong. But then all you have to do is just get back up and rebuild yourself. You've done it X amount of years ago when you joined the army. No one was born for the army or the military, but you built yourself on that particular job and you've got on with it. So now you've left the military, you just have to build yourself again and adapt to the surroundings you're now in. And it's not going to happen overnight. It will take time, but it's just embracing the fact that you've got to, give a bit of give. And, I mean, I'm probably the least motivated person ever. But there are things that do motivate me. And I think sometimes I do need a kick up the arse. But once I'm, I think, you know what, I want to make a difference. That's what I'm going to do. And there's no way I thought this charity was going to drag on for 5 years.
I mean, that's the perfect segue into the Elysium Memorial Foundation. And if no one's heard of that, and to be honest, I hadn't until very recently when I clocked you on TikTok. So if you just want to explain how this came about and what it's all about.
Yeah. So I served 94 to 2018, and in that time I lost, I think, 14 friends to suicide while I was serving, including my best friend, for various different reasons that they took their own life. But essentially, it was for mental health of some description. So when I left, I was still hearing of friends from the battalion, whether they were still in or they had left, but it was still from the same battalion that I served with. I'd heard that these guys, and I say guys because I don't know of a single woman or female soldier from my battalion that has taken their own life. But I think it was 2000 so I left in 18. So 2020, I believe, I heard of another friend who had been a veteran, a civilian, for quite a long time. He had, when we were in Afghan, he shot himself on purpose because he didn't want to be on tour. So, as you can imagine, the military discharged him rather than, and I'll get onto this with the charities. I'm by no means blaming anyone. I didn't set up this charity as a political blame tool kind of thing, but the military kicked him out, as they did with any other soldier in the same situation. You're not safe to be in the military because you can't be trusted with a firearm and your mental health doesn't suit the job that you're doing. So he was discharged. I think it was 2020, he took his own life. And I think looking back on it, we were kind of like, it was almost a ticking time bomb waiting to happen. He loved the army. He didn't want to be somewhere. Through mental health, he did something ridiculously stupid, but he was discharged from the army and then basically fell into drinking drugs with the wrong crowd and then eventually took his own life. It was almost set in stone that it's a spiral that was going to happen. So I decided at the time, I think he was 21st, 22nd friend I'd lost from my battalion to suicide. So I thought, right, something needs to be done. So I had a good chat with my father, who he was already running a veterans motorsport. So it was called Motorsport Endeavour. This is a good time if you tell me I'm wittering, but he was doing. Him and a friend had set up a charity called Motorsport Endeavour, which was helping veterans with mental health through motorsports. And it was very effective, and I loved spending all the time with him. So I went to him. He was my father. He supported me, and he had a good idea of how to deal with veterans' mental health. I approached another friend of mine, Stevie, who I served with very closely, and the three of us came up with this idea. So the sole purpose of the Elysium Memorial Foundation, EMF, as it's known on Facebook, on TikTok, is that we are going to build, or we are building, the UK's first memorial solely dedicated to veteran suicide and for their families and colleagues. So no other memorial anywhere in the UK exists solely dedicated to veteran suicide. Now, this is for all three services, the Royal Navy, the Army, the Royal Air Force, and it's all for all of time. So we're not saying. So I know, for example, there are a memorial that will just be dedicated to those lost in Iraq, those Afghan, Northern Ireland, whatever. This is for all of time. So if someone died in, I don't know, the 1600s from suicide, and I know that their friends and family are not going to be still alive to remember them, but someone somewhere might be, down the chain. So by having a physical memorial, which will be at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire, instead of just going to the graveside of your friend, colleague, family member that has committed suicide, you will have a physical memorial that you can go and reflect there. You might bump into another person who's in the same boat, figuratively speaking, and then
it's a fantastic idea.
And then you can. So I could go there, and knowing that I think I've now lost 26 friends, all to the same unit, but I could go there and I could be thinking about my friend Bob Middleton, who was my best friend who died. Yes, he was in service, but then you could have Bob Smith would come and sit next to me and said, "Oh, do you remember such and such?" Well, you know what? Yeah, I do. And we can reflect on the friends that we've lost and remember the good times, or we can just say, you know what, I'll come back in 5 minutes. I want to be on my own. But and also the other reason behind building this is that, like we said offline, is we talk about veterans' mental health, we talk about mental health, and we talk about suicide. None of them are held in the same conversation. So we talk about suicide, but no one actually ever, I don't know, talks openly about it. I think someone said to me once, everyone in the UK,
stigma attached to it.
Absolutely, but everyone in the UK knows of a veteran that has committed suicide. Sorry, can't use, you know what I mean, has taken their own life. Whether you knew them personally or you knew of them because they've been on media or someone's spoken about it, but everyone knows of a veteran that has taken their own life. So by building a physical memorial, a physical being, means that we can hopefully take the conversation out of the shadows and people can say, oh, there's a suicide memorial for veterans. Excellent. Let's talk about suicide. Let's talk about soldiers, veterans, mental health, and suicide all in the same conversation. And whether it be at the memorial or openly, anywhere else, and hopefully, we encourage people to reach out for their mental health struggles. we know of people who have taken their own lives, or we know of family members or colleagues of someone who's done that, but we never want to see. There doesn't seem to be much to address the issue. Okay, they've committed suicide. We'll remember them. That's fine. But no one says we need to do more to prevent the suicide. So on top of building this memorial to remember, our loved ones that have sadly died by suicide, my charity also offers veteran to veteran mental health help. And as we spoke about offline, I'm not an expert in mental health. I'm not an expert in any medical being. But like you and I have been talking, is that we're both veterans. We're both on the same wavelength. You and I both served in Iraq, for example, but we didn't necessarily serve on the same tour, or same again in Northern Ireland. But we get it. We've done things
there's a common denominator between us all.
Yeah, and whether someone uses an SLR or an SE80, we both did the same job. We both understand. Well, yeah. But we get that banter. We get that dark humor. We can talk shit for hours on end. But then some people just want to chat. They don't necessarily want to move on. But we all know from all the mental health struggles that have been spoken about over the years is that the first issue is reaching out. No one can give you help if you don't acknowledge that you need help.
That's it. That's exactly it. And you can't force people into it either.
Exactly. So if you sit down and have a fireside chat, or you go for a coffee or tea, or you meet in the local park and you just walk around and you talk to each other. Yes, there might be people saying, look, guys, can you keep the noise down? We don't want to know what happened in Iraq. But you're opening that conversation. You're building a good rapport with someone who's probably never met you before in their life, and they've probably never been on the same tour as you, but you have something to offer that can help open the door and break down any awkward barriers. And then I can't fix everyone, barely fix myself, but
no, nobody can.
I am now in a better situation for signposting someone onto someone who can help. Combat stress is good, courage is good. There are loads of charities out there that are bloody marvelous, but it's also not everyone is suited to the same charity. Not everyone is suited to the same help. I've recently discovered, Op Courage is a brilliant initiative, but it's only available in England. Scotland, as I said before, I love my home country, but they've got something else. Or Wales have got something else. Northern Ireland's got something else. And so even if I can't directly help someone, they can always go to the website and say, oh, right, yeah, these guys are in my area. I'll reach out to them. And you know what? Veterans Breakfast Clubs, I'm amazed that I'm not, as wide as I am tall, because the amount of Veterans Breakfast Clubs that are around here is unbelievable. But it doesn't matter if you're a young whippersnapper that's just left the military, or you're, at the other end of the scale. We've all got that same sense. We've all got that same understanding. So if you go to a Veterans Breakfast, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an Armed Forces Veterans Breakfast Club, it could just be, the local community one. But it's just sitting down and having a coffee. Eventually, you might spend the first 3 weeks sitting in a corner on your own, not wanting to get involved. But eventually, someone will say, can I get some help? Or can I talk about my time in the military? And it opens so many possibilities and conversations. It's mind-blowing, but, something so simple. And also, the thing about veterans clubs, breakfast clubs, and whether it be me or someone else, you haven't got someone saying, they're not pressing you. So, right, you're ex-military, you must have mental health issues, you've got to talk about it. We are on the understanding that if you want to sit in the corner on your own and not talk to anyone, that's fine. But, we're here if you need us. And so it's great. I mean, I've had a veteran that I still talk to on a regular basis. Really, really lovely guy. Just, lost his way. And he called me out the blue and said, look, I've run out of money. I was like, you get an army pension? Oh, I went on holiday. But he couldn't afford to eat for 2 weeks. So we have money in the charity's account. We got a Deliveroo shop from the local supermarket or something, dropped it off. Sustainable food. So, and then it opened up the conversation to have a chat. And now we are constantly messaging each other back and forth on WhatsApp saying, hey, how are you? I'm good. And sometimes that's all you need.
That's all you need, yeah.
But being a small charity, it's literally just me and 3 trustees. All our funds are through donations, or from me doing crazy challenges like kayaking from Liverpool to Putney Bridge twice, and things like that, or doing an auction, things like that. But it's funny because, and I was very naive about it, is that when we first set it up, because of the heavy loss of suicide in my 1 battalion. I mean, when we first set it up, I kind of thought we could do it just for that battalion. Why do it for 1 battalion when you can do it for all battalions? Why do it for the army when you can do it for all 3 services? So I thought, how long ago is it now? 5 years. Excuse me. So 5 years ago, when I set it up, I thought it'd be easy to hit this target. Target of 50 grand. I think my sister said aim for 100. I was like, there's no way anyone will, there's no way we'll get that money. But 50 grand's our target. We're still not at our target, but we are in a comfortable place to build a memorial. But yeah, so 5 years ago, I thought with a heavy loss of suicide, we'd get donations no problem at all. I was very much mistaken, but I'm now at the stage where, we're still getting donations. I'm still like spreading the awareness, I'm, merchandise, stickers, things like this. I mean, I don't go anywhere without my stickers attached to my phone, because your phone is always with you.
I'm starting to see the hoodies around more and more, which is great.
More
around social media and stuff like that.
Well, look at TikTok. I mean, for the last 5 years, I've been on, the typical Instagram. I've got an Instagram for my dogs. I've got one for me, and I've got one for my charity. I then got Facebook, which everyone, out of our era has. I've got LinkedIn because it was a good thing to join at the time, and I've had a TikTok page for a while, but it's just been a personal one, and it's only had 5 videos because I don't know if it's still the case, but it was banned for the serving military to be on TikTok because of the Chinese owning TikTok. And I totally get that. That's cool. Paige then said, you need a TikTok account for your charity. And I was like, do we? Thinking it was just full of very young teenagers that are on TikTok. But actually, you've seen it yourself. Yeah, we've met through TikTok.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. I mean, there's a video that Paige generated that I did the narrative for, and I'm still teasing her about it now. She's brilliant. She's doing TikTok all the time. But there's one video that was advertising us doing the journey of delivering the stones from Leyburn to the Arboretum. It's now got 23,000 views. And I was like, bloody hell. That's more than every other video that I've ever done combined.
That it's crazy takes when one kicks off like that, yeah.
but it's very clever and it's very good tool, and it's definitely getting the reach. I've spoken to you. There's loads of guys. Muster Point, allotment veteran. There's a lovely lady, Liz McConaughey, that actually she reached out through LinkedIn because she'd heard my BFBS interview, but and she. You must get her on your show. She's done.
I've been trying for a while.
14 operational doors just off the desert. But
yeah, I listened to her audiobook and it's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. It was the first thing I did was download it. So what we're now using social media for more and more, because I've sent out letters, and everything else, snail mail, everything. But TikTok is definitely the way ahead. I mean, I hate to admit it, but it really is. But on that note, so what we're concentrating on at the moment, as you've probably seen, is on the 12th of June. So on the 1st of June, in next week, Monday, I think it is. So on the 1st of June, we're breaking ground at the Arboretum, putting cement and all that kind of stuff down. And then 12th of June, we are leaving Leyburn, which is up in North Yorkshire near Catchagazen, with the stonework on a truck. And we're looking for as many veterans and bikers, or both if you fill up both categories, to join us in escorting it down from Leyburn to the NMA. And it goes back to, we're building the memorial so that we can talk about suicide more openly. The awareness is there, whether it be merchandise, social media, whatever. But I'm hoping that, when you see Ride to the Wall or Rolling Thunder, all these people, RBL, if you had a convoy of, 50 army vehicles on the motorway, everyone just everyone's like, it's the army. If you've got 500 motorbikes following a truck that's got flags coming off it saying, this is Elysium Memorial, delivering the stonework to its rightful place, first memorial of its kind, it's going to gain attraction, awareness, and everything else. And, I've got media, there are media outlets that are wanting to cover it, which is great. But I'm hoping that everyone in the country on the 12th of June sees this massive convoy of bikers and says, oh, what's that all about? Let's go get quite close to the truck and try and scan the QR code. I've now got a QR code in the back of my car, and I've either got 26 people that have been viewing my website, or I've got 26 speeding tickets. But yeah,
it's a fantastic idea.
I mean, the idea was,
really
build it and they will come, is what Kevin Costner said, isn't it? So, build it and they will start talking about veteran suicide, not just mental health, suicide. Suicide needs to be openly spoken about, and then we can deal with it. We can talk about mental health all day long, and I'm not disputing that it doesn't need to be looked into, but suicide is what, the impact. I mean, as I said, offline, we've just lost another friend to suicide in the last 24 hours that no one would have expected in 100 years. But we all talk about it on Facebook. Everyone says, sorry to see the sad news of such and such who's just died, or the passing of. Everyone says passing of, but they don't say openly, our dear friend has committed suicide. No one, you think about all the people that have been left behind. Friends, families, loved ones, everyone just says, sad to hear the passing of such and such. But what next?
We need to address it, yeah. You're right, we do need to address it. We need to... There is, unfortunately, in society, there's a stigma to suicide and people don't like to talk about it. and it's been like that for time immemorial. It really has. You're right. We need to bring more awareness to it. I can't see it changing overnight, but if nobody makes the effort to do so, it never will. And people like yourself and the memorial that you're putting up will hopefully start opening that gap where people will be comfortably without the stigma to be able to talk about it. It's not just a stigma. People say there's a stigma to suicide for the person who did it. It's also for the people who were left behind. They feel as though they're going to be, let's say, for a bad, for want of a better explanation, tarred with the same brush. Unfortunately, families do feel like that. I did the suicide awareness course at the beginning of or the end of last year, and it opened my eyes. It really did. Unfortunately, it's not just the veterans community that suffers from this. We're such a small cohort in the national averages that it's what amazed me. But then again, in comparison to the number of veterans, the number of suicides, it is high, but it's not, unfortunately saying it's not the highest.
No, I
which
agree.
really surprised me.
I think that
it's a pandemic.
Well, also I think so. I suppose we probably get more sympathy because whether you believe it or not, we've done our bit for the country. We've fought for our country. But interestingly, veterans and military suicide is not the highest rate. Statistically, it's not the highest rate of suicide. So agriculture tops that level.
Agriculture and labourers. Well, up until Christmas last year, it was labourers. But that's not the one that really surprised me. That really wasn't the one that surprised me. It was the female one. And that's it's primary school teachers. You're just like, what?
Well, I think,
I couldn't put around that.
I mean, I think, labourers and agriculture I get because, it's like the peace bashers in France. They've got a high suicide rate because, heavy machinery, long hours, crap hours, lone working. And I get that. And it kind of goes against everything that we've been talking about because we have that camaraderie, we have that family that will never leave your side, but yet they don't necessarily come and talk. But one thing I have learned is it's people don't take their own lives because they don't want to be here. They take their own lives because they want the pain to stop. And it's that simple. And they just want the pain to stop. It doesn't matter how. I had a really, really dear friend who I did a couple of tours with, knew a long, long time in my battalion. And he was the loveliest man ever. And he used to talk openly on Facebook, on videos, about his struggles with mental health, and that his doctor would keep on changing his medication. So when he got right, they would change the medication, and he'd go wrong again. And it was just one of those vicious cycles. He was married to a soldier. I think they had 2 children, or have 2 children. And then one day, he takes his own life. And I remember at the funeral, we were all talking. I mean, it's probably the biggest attendance I've ever seen at a funeral, not including the Queen's. And everyone was saying, you know what, he was an amazing operator. He was one of the best guys anyone had ever met. People would have followed him to the end of the earth. But for him to have done this, we all kind of thought, shit, we're all buggered. If someone that strong and that committed to everything has taken his own life, we're buggered, because the pain was just so much for him that he couldn't go on. He knew that everyone loved him. He knew that he had, so many friends that would, stop work and go and see him at the drop of a hat. People would travel all over the world. If he asked for help, people would be there. And it just got to a stage where the pain was just too much. And that's what's so sad about it, is that and like it's crazy, when my best friend took his own life, we were based in Catterick at the time, and I think we lost, so we were there for 4 years. I think we lost 7 guys in that 4 years period. One of them was an operational tour, Bosnia. I know we lost one on Salisbury Plain as well. But the rest of them, I think it was 5 of them to suicide. They were all for different reasons. My best friend, we're not entirely sure what happened, but I think it was relationship issues. There was a guy who, again, relationship issues. There was a guy who, I think because he wasn't allowed to see his daughter, something like that. But we were in Northern Ireland at the time. Well, in and out of Northern Ireland. We were back and forth like a frisbee, but they were all for different reasons. It wasn't like this guy's seen too much combat or he's got PTSD, whatever it is. They were all almost all individually different reasons. And yes, it could have been it's mental health to a certain degree, but all they want to do is for it to stop. And I think that's what is, incredibly hard to. I think it's hard to stomach, because you think, well, hold on, you're my best mate. You could have reached out to me, but sometimes you just can't.
The thing is, it's what I've discovered. I've lost not as many, but I have lost a fair few friends to suicide. Is that because you don't have them feelings yourself? You don't have them ideations. You can't understand the pain and anguish that somebody who decides to do that is going through. Again, if it's like a bad analogy is having a bad back in the army. You know what I mean? Everyone thinks you're pulling a wool because you can't see the injury. You haven't got a cast on, you haven't got a bandage around your head, type of thing. So you don't see that injury that's there in their brain. For want of a better explanation. So we find it hard to accept that if somebody decides that's the way out, that's the way out. That's the way it's going to stop the pain. Don't get me wrong. I've had episodes in my life where I've thought it might be the way out. And I've talked myself out of it as soon as I talk myself into it. It's just the way my mind works.
Yeah.
I'd look at myself and say, W twat. It probably wouldn't work anyway. You just hate yourself. And that was just my inner monologue stopping me, thinking about it. But you're right. We have to open our eyes more to suicide and find out what we can do for people. And you're right. A lot of people just say, "Oh yeah, well, I've seen that. We've got to do something," and then do nothing. I've been guilty of that. You'd have been guilty of that. Everyone has. Oh, we've got to do more than, and nothing happens. But at least you've stepped up this time, and you are doing something. But also, I think that reels are fantastic.
I think also what people forget is we talk about mental health all the time, but people automatically think that veterans' mental health must be combat related. It must be PTSD.
Yeah.
Or in fact, so supporting wounded veterans, very good charity. They call it PTSI because they don't want to see it, and I think the Canadians call it PTSI as well. So post-traumatic stress injury, not disorder. Because if you call someone if you tell someone they've got a disorder, they're like, "Oh, what's wrong with me?" It's an injury. There's better acceptance, and it means that you can get better from it. And I think that, again, there's another stigma that doesn't necessarily help. As you said, a lot of people almost want PTSD because it's a label that they can relish on. But I think that there was so much more to the reasoning behind suicide. It's not just, I saw combat and the pain's got too much. There could be and what I don't know, developed and got to know from doing this for the last 5 years is if you see someone sitting on their own, not engaging with someone, in the past, especially in the army, you're like, miserable bastard, why is he not talking to anyone? Whereas now you think, well, hold on, he could have not had a very good night's sleep last night, or he might be having relationship issues, or, there's so many different things that could be going on in that person's head. He might well just be sitting against the wall, chilling out. But you don't know you don't know anything about them until you go over and you start a conversation and you say, hey, buddy, what's up? And they're like, oh, I'm just enjoying the sun. Cool. I'm not feeling very well. You sit down next to them and you have that chat with them. And even if, I've also learned you don't want those leading questions. You can just, if you don't want to talk about it,
Just talk.
it's cool. I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to talk out loud about my enjoyable time in Canada with the army, for example. And eventually they might crack and just say, you know what, I'll talk about my military career so you can shut up. Or they'll say, okay, let's talk. And, it's making that step.
The National Rail encourage that, and they train their train operators, they train their train staff to do exactly that. And they've had a massive success rate in reducing suicides on the railway. They actively encourage, if you think someone's looking a bit, sus, go and engage with them, and it's reduced their suicide rates on the railways massively.
But also you're distracting them as well. So, they might think, right, no one loves me, I'm off, and as they approach the rails and someone just taps them on the shoulder and like, you're all right. They'll forget what they were about to do and they're completely distracted, like, yeah, thanks very much. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go wait for my train somewhere else. But yeah.
Right, Ed, we've been on here nearly 2 hours. That's flown by. I didn't expect it. I didn't expect it to last this long. It's really, really flown by, and there's lots more we could probably talk about. But you've got stuff to do. I know I have. What's the future hold for you now? Once the memorials, the stone's going in, you're obviously going to raise more funds for the charity and help people like that. Is there any more like bike rides or anything like that planned in the future?
Well, I'm not sure about bike rides after this, but what I would really like to do is, it was very hard work, but I would still very much like to do another long, epic kayak, because the reason we did the kayaking is because it was post-COVID. Everyone's done a marathon. God, I've still got my marathon next year. Everyone's done a marathon. Everyone's jumped out of a plane. But seeing the English countryside, or whichever countryside, from a kayak is amazing, because you're seeing a completely different side. And a lot of veterans live on houseboats, so it's a great time to knock on the on the side of a houseboat and have a chat. But I want to continue raising the awareness. So even if I have to travel somewhere and talk about values and standards and why we're doing this, then so be it. And that's what I want to do. I want to concentrate on bringing suicide out of the shadows and talking about and helping people talk about their mental health and prevent suicide. My two trustees, they would very much like me to continue that journey on helping mental health and helping veterans. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I never thought we'd get to this stage. And then now that we have, I'm like, what do I do next? A lot of people are suggesting that I personally take 6 months off and have a break and, have a think. But I went to see the Stones today at the stonemasons, and I'm completely blown away with how amazing they look, but also how much all the hard work that we've done for the last 5 years has now got this. To put them onto the back of that truck and, drive with them all the way down to the Arboretum and watch the construction team put it together. I'm already lost for words.
Yeah.
I think that what next is I want to continue fighting the suicide battle, helping veterans and their mental health. Let's, have as many campfire chats as possible, but I just want to help people. I just want to help people in general. I think I got that from my father, being in a successful company, giving all that up and, going off to be an aid worker, and then me joining the army. So I want to help people, but I want to help veterans especially, and I especially want to stop suicide from happening in the first place, or at least die trying.
Right. Well, I'll say thank you for coming on. I've enjoyed it immensely. I'm almost lost for words, to be honest. I
Thanks,
wish
Frankie.
you all the best in the future, and I can't wait to see, the memorial when it's been erected. I'll get this out. I've never been there. I've never been down there, to be honest. And I must really go at some point.
I was the same. I didn't go there until I was on a security task for VJ75. And I thought, oh, I'll have a wander around. I was like, God, this place is amazing. And it's only getting bigger. It is staggering. You can, what's quite clever is you're not allowed to build benches as part of your memorial because they don't want you to sit down at one memorial and not visit the rest of the site. So my memorial has been particularly planned, strategically planned. It's at a level that you can perch your bum on. So if you want, I'm not encouraging people to clamber over it like a playground, but the idea is that if you wanted to sit on the grass or perch your bum on top of one of these low walls as part of the memorial, you can do exactly that. And the great thing about the site that it is at, it's next to the poppy field, so it's away from the main hustle and bustle of the other memorials and regimental flags. So you can sit there with the poppy meadows in the background and be on your own, or, as I said, wait for someone to come over and you can share your story.
Yeah. Right, I'm going to end the recording there, mate. Again, thanks for coming on. I've really appreciated this, and I wish you all the luck in the future.
Thanks, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that podcast. I enjoyed recording it. If you could just hit the like button, and also if you could subscribe and hit the notification bell, that would be great, because it'll help the channel grow. The more people will see it, the bigger it'll get, and the more guests I can get on, and the more people I can talk to. Well, I hope you enjoyed it, like I said. Look forward to the next one. Hopefully we'll be out next week as normal. Bye-bye now.